Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling uh, a real giant of Victorian art, Sir John Everett Millais. His life story, honestly, it reads like fiction from this radical young painter to a pillar of the establishment. It's quite the journey.
It really is. Almost two different artists in one lifetime, you know? He starts as this key figure in the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, totally anti-establishment, and ends up Sir John, a baronet, incredibly wealthy, president of the Royal Academy.
Exactly. So the sources we're digging into today, they trace this whole arc. How does someone go from shocking the critics to, well, setting the trends and even famously selling soap?
That's the core question, and you can almost boil down that tension, that contradiction to two moments.
Okay, what are they?
Well, first, he's this astonishing child prodigy. Gets into the Royal Academy schools, the youngest student they'd ever had, 11 years old.
11. That's unbelievable.
Right. Pure, raw talent. Then, fast forward decades later, one of his most famous paintings, Bubbles, it ends up being used as an advert for Pear's soap.
The soap ad. That's probably what sticks in a lot of people's minds, isn't it?
It is, and that contrasts the intense artistic purity of his youth versus the, let's say, sentimental commercialism later on. That's the fault line we're exploring. We have to understand the early shockwaves he created first, though.
Okay, let's unpack that. Where does this radical talent even come from? He was born in Southampton, 1829, but his family had strong Jersey roots.
Very strong. And he was fiercely proud of it. There's that great story about William Thackeray, the author.
Oh, yeah.
Thackeray apparently asked him, sort of teasingly, when did England conquer Jersey?
Okay.
And Millais, apparently without missing a beat, just shoots back, never. Jersey conquered England.
Huh. That tells you something about his confidence, doesn't it?
Absolutely. That sort of inherent self-belief. And it wasn't just him. His mother, Emily Mary Millais, she was a huge driving force.
The sources describe her as having a forceful personality.
Understatement, maybe. She saw his talent early on, and, well, she basically engineered his career path. She moved the whole family to London, specifically to get him connections, to get him into the Royal Academy.
Wow.
Millais himself said later, very simply, "I owe everything to my mother." Her drive was crucial.
And it worked. Getting into the RA schools at 11 in 1840, I mean, that's just unprecedented. This is the absolute heart of the establishment art world.
Totally. The place you went to learn the rules, the classical stuff. But ironically, it's there, inside the Academy walls, that he meets William Holman Hunt and Dante Gabriel Rossetti.
The other key figures.
Exactly. And these three young guys, full of ambition and, frankly, fed up with the state of British art.
Like a rebellion.
Pretty much. They found the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, the PRB, in September 1847, and the meeting happens right there in Millais' family home on Gower Street.
So what was their beef, exactly? What were they rebelling against? Pre-Raphaelite?
Yeah.
Or for Raphael?
Precisely. They felt that art after Raphael, high Renaissance and onwards, had become kind of stale, artificial, overly reliant on formulas. They wanted to go back to the intensity, the detail, the sort of moral seriousness of Italian art before Raphael.
So more realism, more detail.
Obsessive detail, that was the hallmark. Intense observation of nature, rendering everything, every leaf, every thread, every texture with almost scientific precision. You mentioned the phrase pictorial ecosystem.
Yeah, I remember reading that.
That's it. Their paintings are incredibly dense. They often painted on a wet, white ground to get this amazing luminosity, which was super demanding, slow work.
And applying this hyperrealism to religious subjects.
Wow.
That's where the trouble started, right? Like with Christ in the house of his parents.
Right.
1849-50.
Oh, big trouble. That painting caused an absolute uproar because instead of the usual serene, idealized Holy Family...
He painted them like actual working people.
Exactly. In a messy carpenter's workshop, realistic dirt, worn hands, the shavings on the floor. It was seen as shockingly irreverent, blasphemous even to some.
And the critics went wild. I remember Dickens was particularly savage.
Charles Dickens absolutely unloaded on it, wrote this scathing review anonymously at first in his magazine Household Words.
What did he say?
He called Millais' Mary ugly and ghastly and described the young Christ as a hideous, wry-necked, blubbering, red-haired boy in a nightgown. Just brutal.
Wow. No holding back.
None at all. It really shows how deeply Millais' realism offended the establishment view of how sacred subjects should look.
But then, not long after, he paints Ophelia, 1851-52. Still incredibly detailed, but maybe less. religiously provocative.
Ophelia is maybe the ultimate PRB painting in terms of that naturalist focus and sheer beauty. The detail is astonishing. He spent something like 5 months painting just the background foliage outdoors by the Hogs Mill River.
5 months on the background.
Yeah, battling the elements. And then you have the story of the model, Elizabeth Siddal,
Posing in the bathtub.
floating in a bathtub full of water, kept warm by lamps underneath. Except the lamps went out, she got incredibly ill. It just shows the lengths they went to for that realism.
That's dedication. Or obsession, maybe.
A bit of both, probably. But while Ophelia and Christ were controversial, he did start to find popular success too, didn't he? With paintings like A Huguenot.
Right, A Huguenot.
Yeah?
1851-52 again, that one seemed to hit a different nerve.
It did. It had that PRB detail, but it also had this really powerful, relatable human story, a couple torn apart by religious conflict during the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. People responded to the emotion.
So he could blend the technique with popular themes?
He was learning how. He was proving he could be radical and connect with the public. He was on his way up. But then everything changes.
The scandal.
The scandal. It all revolves around John Ruskin.
The famous art critic. The one who actually defended the PRB against Dickens.
The very same. Ruskin was their champion, their intellectual supporter. He and Millais became quite close friends.
And Ruskin introduces Millais to his wife, Effie Gray.
Correct. Effie then models for Millais for his painting The Order of Release in 52-53. They spend a lot of time together.
And they fall in love?
Deeply. Now, the context here is crucial, as you know. Effie and Ruskin had been married for several years.
But the marriage was unconsummated.
Exactly. Ruskin hadn't, well, whatever reason, hotly debated by historians, he hadn't fulfilled the marriage physically.
Which back then was grounds for an annulment, right? Not divorce, but
Yep.
saying the marriage never legally existed.
Precisely. It was a very rare out for women. Effie's parents got involved. She filed for annulment based on Ruskin's impotence, and it was granted in 1854. It was a massive public scandal.
And the following year, 1855, Effie marries John Millais.
Yes. Which professionally for Millais was complicated.
Complicated how?
Well, for starters, he'd completely alienated John Ruskin, arguably the most powerful voice in British art criticism. Ruskin was never going to support his work again. In fact, quite the opposite.
Right, and personally.
Personally, he now had a wife, and very quickly, a growing family. They ended up having 8 children together.
8? That's a lot of mouths to feed in Victorian London.
It's a huge financial undertaking. They move into a big house, 7 Cromwell Place in Kensington from 1862. Millais needed to earn serious money. And quickly.
And this is where the big shift in his painting style comes in. The move away from that painstaking PRB detail.
Directly linked, according to many sources. He started painting much faster, using a broader technique. Less meticulous detail, looser brushwork, thicker paint application impasto.
Why the change in technique? Just speed.
Speed was definitely a factor. That slow, layered PRB method just wasn't efficient if you needed to produce a lot of paintings to sell. The broader style allowed him to finish canvases much, much faster.
So a practical decision driven by money and family.
That's certainly how his critics saw it. And the backlash was immediate and fierce. Ruskin probably still stinging from the annulment.
He called the new style a catastrophe.
A catastrophe. Not just bad, but like a tragic fall from grace. And others piled on. William Morris, another former associate.
The designer and socialist.
Yeah. Morris basically accused Millais outright of selling out, sacrificing his artistic soul for money and popularity, joining the establishment he once fought against.
Ouch. Did Millais ever defend himself against this? I mean, being called a sellout couldn't have felt good.
No, and he didn't just take it. Later on, he argued back. He wrote an article in 1888, Thoughts on Our Art of Today, where he basically said the change wasn't about selling out, it was about growing confidence.
Confidence? How so?
He argued that as he matured, he didn't need the super tight detail anymore. He could paint with more boldness, more freedom. He even cited old masters like Velázquez and Rembrandt as his models.
Velázquez and Rembrandt, known for their loose, suggestive brushwork.
Exactly. He was framing it as an evolution towards a different kind of mastery, not a decline.
Was that just spin, though? A way to justify the need to pay the bills? Or did people actually buy the artistic argument?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? For the purists, like Ruskin and Morris, no, it was purely commercial. But for others, especially younger artists and critics, they did see something else happening.
Like what?
They saw that this broader style, this focus on bolder effects, actually connected with new trends emerging in the 1860s and 70s. It wasn't just about speed, it was, maybe unintentionally at first, tapping into the aesthetic movement.
Ah, art for art's sake. Less about story, more about beauty and color and form.
Precisely. Millais's work started moving away from complex narratives towards more symbolic, atmospheric stuff, paintings like The Eve of St. Agnes or The Somnambulist.
And sources say he was actually supportive of Whistler, James McNeill Whistler, a key aesthetic figure.
He recognized the shift happening. His later work, with its broad areas of color and focus on mood, gained admiration from people who saw links to Whistler to Albert Moore, even saw his influence on the next generation, like John Singer Sargent.
So he was adapting, keeping himself relevant, even as tastes changed.
Very successfully. And by the 1870s, he's leaning into this establishment role. He starts referencing the great British portraitists like Sir Joshua Reynolds, alongside Velázquez again. And he paints these big, grand historical subjects.
Themes that would resonate with Victorian Britain's sense of itself.
Absolutely. Things like the two princes, Edward and Richard in the Tower, tapping into royal history and tragedy, or paintings celebrating exploration and empire like the Northwest Passage or Boyhood of Raleigh.
These are big patriotic statements, cementing his role as, like, the nation's painter.
Pretty much. But,
Yeah.
for all the grand history paintings, what really made him incredibly wealthy and a household name?
The children's portraits.
The children's portraits. This was his path to megastardom and serious money. He painted these incredibly charming, often sentimental pictures of children that the public just adored.
Things like Cherry Ripe,
Hmm.
featuring those Pettigrew sisters who became famous models themselves.
Exactly. And an idol of 1745. But the absolute peak, or maybe the most controversial point, was Bubbles, 1886.
Bubbles. The painting of his little grandson, Willie James, blowing a soap bubble.
That's the one. And the painting itself was popular, but what happened next is key. The rights were bought by A&F Pears, the soap company.
And they turned it into one of the most famous advertisements ever.
They did, slapped the Pears soap logo on it and reproduced it everywhere. It became synonymous with the brand. Idealized childhood innocence used to sell soap.
Was that the first time high art was used so directly in mass advertising?
It was certainly one of the most high-profile and defining moments. It sparked huge debate. Was Millais bringing art to the masses? Or had the ultimate pre-Raphaelite rebel finally, definitively sold his soul to commerce?
What did Millais think? Was he okay with it?
Well, he was paid very well for it. Apparently he initially resisted, but eventually agreed. It cemented his popular fame, but also solidified the sellout narrative for his detractors.
And it wasn't just paintings, right? He was doing commercial work in other areas, too.
Yeah.
Illustration.
Hugely successful book illustrator. Very well paid for it, too. He did illustrations for big names like Anthony Trollope, poems by Tennyson.
His skill with narrative from the PRB days must have helped there.
Absolutely. And some of his illustrations were artworks in their own right. Those complex drawings he did for the Parables of Jesus, published in 1864.
Yes.
They were so highly regarded, they were later adapted into stained glass windows for a church in Scotland, Kinnell Parish Church. So he's operating across fine art, history painting, portraiture, advertising, illustration. He's everywhere.
A true Victorian multimedia star, in a way.
You could say that, and the official art establishment absolutely embraced him.
His Royal Academy career track reflects that, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Associate member in 53, full member by 63.
Right. He was a major figure within the Academy for decades, but the absolute pinnacle of establishment recognition comes in 1885.
Queen Victoria steps in.
Queen Victoria makes him Sir John Everett Millais Baronet, a hereditary title.
The first artist ever to get a hereditary title, not just a knighthood.
The very first. It was monumental. It basically integrated him and his lineage into the British aristocracy, the ultimate insider status for the former rebel.
And then, right at the end of his life, the final institutional crown.
Elected president of the Royal Academy in 1896, after Lord Leighton died, he'd reached the absolute top. Though, sadly, he didn't hold the position for long.
Before we get to the end, there's that other fascinating thread in his later work, the landscapes, especially the Scottish ones.
Yes, this is a really important counterpoint to the popular, sometimes sentimental work. From about 1870 onwards, he starts painting these large-scale landscapes, often inspired by his annual hunting and fishing trips to Perthshire.
And these weren't pretty picturesque scenes.
Not at all. They're often quite bleak, autumnal, moody, Think windswept moors, desolate loch, a sense of melancholy and the passage of time. Very atmospheric.
Does that connect back somehow to the mood of his earlier works, like Autumn Leaves?
I think it does. There's an emotional depth there, a focus on transience. He's not painting with that microscopic PRB detail anymore, obviously, but the intensity of observation is still there. It's just expressed differently with broader strokes, capturing the feel of the place.
Any key examples?
Chill October from 1870 is often seen as the first major one, really captures that damp end-of-year feeling. Or later, Christmas Eve, 1887, which was his first big snow scene, all fog and texture. They show he was still capable of profound, serious work alongside the popular stuff.
So he becomes president of the RA in 1896, the peak of his career.
But he dies later that same year, August 1896, throat cancer.
And his last painting was unfinished.
Yeah, the last trek. Based on an illustration for his son's book, apparently depicting a hunter lying dead in the wilderness, a rather somber final image.
And given his status?
He was buried in St. Paul's Cathedral, the ultimate establishment resting place.
But even after his death, the controversies continued. There was something about his statue.
Oh, yes. The Prince of Wales commissioned a statue by Thomas Brock, which was put up outside the Tate Gallery in 1905. A tribute to a national hero, right?
Seems straightforward enough.
But fast forward to the mid-20th century. Modernism is dominant, and Victorian art, especially someone like Millais, seen as the epitome of the establishment, is deeply unfashionable.
So the statue becomes a problem.
A big problem for some. The Tate director at the time, Norman Reed, actually tried repeatedly to get the statue removed in the 50s and 60s.
Removed? Why?
He famously called its presence positively harmful. For Reed and the modernist viewpoint, Millais represented everything outdated. Sentimental, narrative-driven, commercially successful art. The statue was a symbol of a past they wanted to bury. Millais was the ultimate sellout whose ghost needed exorcising.
So the statue represented a kind of artistic embarrassment.
To the modernist gatekeepers, yes. It was a sign that Britain hadn't fully embraced the correct path of art history. Reed failed to get it removed completely for years, but it was eventually moved to a less prominent spot in 2000. Still a bit contentious.
But that negative view, that dismissal of his later work, that seems to have changed again more recently, hasn't it?
Massively. There's been a huge reassessment. Art historians now look at his later style not just as a commercial compromise, but in the context of wider European art trends.
Also?
That looser brushwork, the focus on color and mood, the speed. It's now seen less as selling out and more as anticipating aspects of Impressionism or aestheticism. His move away from pure narrative is seen as, well, almost proto-modernist in its own way. The catastrophe Ruskin saw is now viewed as an interesting evolution.
And beyond the art history debates, his personal story keeps him in the public eye. That Ruskin-Effie Millais triangle is just too dramatic to ignore.
Absolutely. It's perfect fodder for drama. You've got films like Effie Gray from 2014, the BBC series Desperate Romantics. That story guarantees he won't just be a dusty name in a textbook. People connect with the human drama.
And the public still turns out for his exhibitions.
In huge numbers. That big Tate Britain retrospective in 2007, it pulled in over 150,000 visitors in London alone. And when it traveled internationally, Amsterdam, Japan, the total audience was over 660,000. That tells you something.
It really does. People still want to see his work, all of it.
Radical, establishment, controversial, sentimental. It's all part of the story now, and people are fascinated by the whole package.
So wrapping this up, it's an incredible journey. Youngest RA student, revolutionary pre-Raphaelite, shocks everyone. Then the scandal, the marriage, the 8 kids, the style shift.
Becomes Sir John, the baronet, paints bubbles, gets elected president of the RA, all while doing these moody Scottish landscapes. It's almost too much for one life.
It really is. The connection between the personal drama needing to support Effie and the family and the professional change seems undeniable, though.
It seems like the engine, doesn't it? Personal circumstances, financial pressure, maybe growing artistic confidence, too. It all combined to reshape his career. A career that was revolutionary, then widely criticized as a sellout, and now kind of rehabilitated as complex and maybe even predictive.
So the final thought for you listening to this. What do we make of Millais today? You have the intense, painstaking detail of Ophelia, on one hand, absolute artistic devotion.
And on the other, you have the immense popularity and commercial afterlife of Bubbles, the soap ad. He faced harsh judgment for choosing popularity and wealth. But if that later work, the supposed sellout stuff, is now seen as forward-looking in some ways.
Does that change how we view the choice? Does massive, enduring popularity ultimately offer its own kind of validation, even if it comes at the cost of early ideals?
Maybe Millet's real genius wasn't just the early radicalism, but his ability to navigate the pressures, adapt, and thrive in the complex world of art, commerce, and family. It's a timeless dilemma for any creator, isn't it? Integrity versus success, purity versus popularity. Millet's lived that conflict perhaps more dramatically than anyone.